we're going to talk about the function of the urinary system. What is the whole purpose of the urinary system? Well, the objective here is to look at how waste products are actually filtered through the urinary system. So let's recap from the circulatory system. If we look right over here, use a different color. Let's just use red because it's oxygenated blood. This is the left ventricle, and the left ventricle is going to pump blood right out through the aorta. And this is the aortic arch. It's going to descend through the thoracic aorta, and eventually it's going to hit the abdominal aorta. And there's going to be arteries coming off of the abdominal aorta, one of which is the renal artery. And renal just means kidneys. Blood's going to go into a bunch of capillary beds, not just one. There's actually multiple capillary beds. And blood will come out of these capillary beds, leaving the kidneys, and enter through the renal vein. Eventually, that blood will go up through the inferior vena cava back to the heart. Here's another diagram for you. Right over here, number 3, this here is the renal artery. And if we look in blue, blood is going to come out of the kidneys once the kidneys are done filtering that blood out through the renal vein. Now, any junk that was filtered, right, any waste products actually don't come back through the renal vein. Any waste products will actually go through this long tube that's coming out of the kidneys called the ureter. Now my question to you is, which blood vessel has cleaner blood? The renal artery or the renal vein? Now think carefully. And the answer is the renal vein actually has cleaner blood, right? Because the renal vein is the vessel that leaves the kidneys after the blood has been filtered. In fact, when we think of waste products, what was actually high in waste products was the renal artery. So the renal artery actually has a lot of waste, and we're going to talk about what that waste is in a minute. Right? And it's going to also have lots of oxygen. Now you're probably thinking waste. We're going to talk about waste. I'm not talking about carbon dioxide in this case. I'm talking about other waste products, such as uric acid and urea. And we're going to talk about what that is. So I'm just going to say when I talk about a lot of waste, I'm talking about lots of uric acid and lots of urea. And the renal vein actually has high amounts of carbon dioxide, but it has low amounts of waste, meaning it has decreases amounts of uric acid and low amounts of urea. And I know every time we look at blue, we associate that with bad. And every time we look at red, we associate that with good, right? Because red means it's oxygenated, so it must be good. Well, this is an exception. Any oxygenated blood that goes right through into the renal, via the renal artery, has much waste that has to be filtered. And any of that blood coming from the kidneys, in this case the renal vein, actually has very little waste product, because much of that waste product we're going to talk about actually ends up in the ureter, and this ureter is a tube that connects the kidneys, as we see, to the bladder. Let's look in this diagram. Notice again, this here's the ureter, right? And the ureter is pushing any potential waste. And maybe I shouldn't use blue. Let's use yellow, because we think of that as urine. right? The ureter produces potential urine. That's why it's called the ureter. And that's going to go into the bladder, and eventually it's going to come out through the urethra. In the next video, we're going to talk about what that waste product actually is.